All right. My apologies and good morning, everyone. Today, we have 2 long chapters to get through, and you'll notice a lot of repeated information. More than likely, when we're repeating, it's something that's going to be possibly in the test. So just keep that in mind, and we apologize. We didn't create these, but we try to do the best we can in presenting them and getting you guys all the information you'll need to pass that test with flying colors in Rome soon. So sign up. All right, on we go. Chapter 13. Trees in construction, and I've had a little bit of experience with this end of things, being a municipal arborist for the last, I don't know, 20 years. Anyway, here we go. Okay, so let me get that off there. No, I don't want to exit full screen. Thank you. Okay, so what we're going to go over in this course is the effects of construction and damage on trees, planning for development, conservation of trees on construction sites. We're going to go over soil grade changes, and how to treat trees damaged by construction. We'll go into a little bit of that. All right, so trees, we all know, are valuable and have environmental, economic, and aesthetic benefits to a property. They look good, they decrease the heat load, they suck up water like crazy. So they really have a value to a city, a homeowner, a business. It helps us all, especially with the water uptake with stormwater. That's less water we have to treat. Not to mention the whole, hey, we need to breathe thing in putting out oxygen. But yeah, so they are a good thing to have, and you want to conserve that. So construction damage is one of the most common causes of tree death and decline, especially in urban areas. A professional arborist should be involved early in the planning process. I can't say that enough. You really should be one of the first steps. If you are out there dealing with construction industry clients, builders, developers, even site designers, that's who I like to get a hold of, is the guy designing this whole thing. Because if I can get them to understand early in the process, then trees are considered up front, not as an afterthought. And that's where we need to get it to. So you need to be involved as a professional arborist in the beginning of a development project to advise on retention of trees, protection measures, how you're going to protect those trees, assist in designing a suitable layout that'll work for both your client and the trees, right? And minimize that construction damage. The greatest damage to most trees on a water and all those little cations and all those wonderful little things in the soil, well, once that gets flattened and crushed by construction, it takes a long time to recover, if at all, if no measures are done to replace those air spaces in the soil. So, like I said, that's the biggest one is underground. Physical wounding of trees, as long as it's not massive, hey, an accident may happen. They may be able to recover from that. If it's a bad enough strike, they won't recover from that. So keeping things out of that protection area away from the tree, that's the best way to start, right? You want to avoid environmental changes. You want to avoid soil compaction, excessive thinnings of stands of trees, your stress, soil fill on top of the tree's root system, or on the opposite end, soil cuts, where you're taking away root mass, right? So all those things are going to really affect trees. Let's remember where trees' roots are in the soil, right? So you have those support roots right near the trunk, maybe 10 to 20 feet out. The bigger the tree, the further out those support roots are going to go. And then outside that drip line, you're going to be looking at that feeder root system, right? And they're going to keep extending out. I mean, they did a test on the trees in Savannah with an air spade, and they uncovered the root system from a tree, a live oak tree down there. They had to stop 5 miles from the trunk. They could have kept going, I want you to understand, but they had to stop 5 miles from the trunk. So when we say the biggest part's underground, that's what we're talking about. And your critical root zone is the minimum amount of roots a tree needs to survive. That's not all of their roots. It's not even half their roots most of the time, but it's all that they have to survive. So you cut beyond that, and now we have troubles, right? So remember where those roots are in the soil, and they're not way deep either. They're only going to be, depending on your soil type, you may get them 3 foot down, but here in a hard clay area, we're lucky if our roots are 6 inches to 12 inches in the soil. So you really need to know your trees, know your soils, where their roots are. And that's how you help in these construction ends, how the trees are growing, which ones can you realistically save on a property. So like I said, greatest damage is underground. This one where they put in the structure you see to the right, and then you can see a pipe coming off there. There was another couple of cuts made while they were doing this installation. And this was the result after the project was finished. The tree that was nearby the bridge now is on top of a car. Luckily, nobody was hurt in this one, but they could have been, you know. So you compromise that structural root plate, all bets are off for the tree being able to hold itself up in a good wind event. Just not going to happen. So cutting of roots, obviously this is one of the worst things we can do. Trenching and digging removes vital feeder roots that pick up nutrients and water for the tree. They eliminate nutrient-rich topsoil that the trees need, take away that airspace, take away the roots, damage major roots, the structural roots, and opens them up to pest entry. So even if you get them treated in time, you know, it's going to take a while for that to compartmentalize and shut down. And while it's open, it's susceptible to everything that's already there in the soils, right? It reduces the ability to the tree to anchor itself. And you should always consider tunneling under large tree roots instead of trenching. It's just kind of a no-brainer. You can get under the tree roots, they're not that deep, and you can snake that pipe through. So let's look at step one. We're cutting roots, right? We're going to do this lovely sidewalk installation. So we start by uncovering the tree's root. Excuse me. Step two, we just cut that root off. Yeah, it doesn't really need those two big roots. Look at all the other ones it's got left. Step three, yeah, you guessed it, Quercus horizontali, over the tree goes. It just can't stand up without those support roots. Physical wounds on a tree, you're removing large areas of bark and cambium, and that reduces the tree's vigor. Remember, we talked about that straw drawing waters up and down. Well, now that portion, until it's compartmentalized, is not going to be able to draw. Large wounds seal or close very slowly. And during that whole time, it's like ringing a dinner bell for pests or insects or disease, little fungal spores that come floating by. Improper pruning or branch breakage also leads to open wounds on these trees. So you really have to be careful and try and keep the construction equipment out of the way of those trees. If there's going to have to be one close, there are methods that you can utilize, and we'll go into that in a minute, to keep the roots safe. And you can always preemptively prune if you know the equipment is going to reach up and take out those lower scaffold branches. It's better to prune them off cleanly than to have them broken and ripped by construction equipment. Sorry, let me get a drink of water here. Oh, apologies. Okay. We talked about soil compaction. Well, running heavy equipment over root zones compacts the soil, obviously. Piling debris on top of the tree roots over an extended period of time, that's compacting the tree roots. Parking construction trailers and equipment under the trees. Hey, let's keep them cool. Yeah, well, it's not going to be cool for long when that tree dies due to the construction impact, right? There goes your shade. There goes your beautiful tree. So you've got to keep that stuff off there. And it doesn't take much. I mean, they did a compaction test at one of the universities. And they had a woman in high-heeled shoes walk across a construction impact plate. And then they did a track dozer. Guess who impacted more? If you said the lady in high heels, you are correct. All that focused weight on that small point of the heel compacted more than a track dozer that was spread out weight over those big tracks. So it doesn't take much. Our foot traffic back and forth every day, cutting grass or cutting through to get to somewhere over a tree's root system compacts the soils underneath. So just keep that in mind. That's one of the worst things you can do. Soil fill, obviously tree roots, when you put soil over the top, it suffocates them, especially if it's fine textured like clays and compacted on top of that. Just a few inches of fill can kill roots if it's compacted. Damage may not be seen for many years. Trees don't die overnight from compaction. You know, they have reserves and things like that that they utilize in stores, and it's a slow process. It's called a cycle of decline. So they're declining over a period of, 3 to 5 years. And then all of a sudden, when the new owner gets that property 3 to 5 years later, hey, my tree starts dying. What's going on? We get those calls all the time as arborists. And it's all from the damage that was done during the construction phase. Even in the absence of grade changes, drainage can be affected. So they always have to put in drainage away from the foundation of a new house. That's part of the code. So in doing that, they're altering the natural water flow of a project. Trees that maybe used to get water now aren't getting water, or the opposite, trees that didn't used to get that much water, now it's all been focused to them, right? So they're getting too much water. We talked about how much damage too much water can do, right? So obviously in the lower right-hand corner, if you look at that one, you can see that that tree is not going to do too well, not with that kind of damage over the root system here. You've basically buried the entire root plate. So this is a recipe for disaster. And I've seen somebody try and suggest this on a construction site. It doesn't work. So they will not recover usually from damage like that. Okay. Slide. Oh, I'm not sure why it's not moving forward. That's bizarre. Have I frozen? Okay, let's try that again. My apologies, everyone. I'm not sure why we're not going. We're still sharing.
Yeah, I definitely can see. Yeah, maybe it's just needing a refresh.
Ah, there we go. Okay, sorry about that. So moving on. Moisture stress. Whoa, that's a mouthful to say 3 times fast. Go ahead. No, I'm kidding. Changes in the soil grade, cutouts or soil fills. That's going to, like I just said, change the way water flows to a tree, right? Then you're compacting the soils, which is not going to be good. Changes in grading and drainage all affects trees through moisture stress, either too much or not enough moisture, right? Trees can end up being way too wet or way too dry and definitely not able to adapt. They cannot adapt like we can. Oh, I'm not getting enough water. I'll do things to make sure I stay cooler. I'll stay in the shade. Well, trees can't do that. They're stuck where they are, right? They get used to the amount of rain and water that they get from nature. And when that stops being there, then they go into stress, right? Or if all of a sudden they get too much, they don't know how to handle that and they go into stress, right? So they're not as adaptable as we are. Exposure. All right, so this picture on the right kind of says it all. You've taken a forest of trees, you've cut down most of them. Oh, but we'll save this one as a focal point. Now, this poor tree was in the middle of a stand of trees. So all the trees work together, right? They all are sharing the root space, they're overlapping, they're providing extra strength. The ones in the center of the stand, they're not used to bending and flexing, right? Because they've got everybody else around them. And they don't even put out limbs that low. I mean, look at this poor tree. It's got barely any live limbs except for the very top where it was getting sun in that stand, right? So you got a weaker tree, you got a thinner trunk that hasn't been able to flex and move, you have a smaller crown, and now you're trying to leave it out there by itself. Well, it's going to be vulnerable to wind throw or ice breakage, right? Because it doesn't have help to help it stand up and stay out of the wind. It's either going to catch its first wind, bend backwards and break then, or bend backwards and go snap back up and then it's going to break. You know, it just doesn't have the flexibility of a tree that grew up under that wind condition, right? So, you know, planning and protection, that's your preliminary thing. Your plan should be, you should plan for how this construction is going to start and what trees are going to stay, what trees are going to be preserved to meet whatever code requirement you have, and the wishes of the owner of the lot, what they want for their property, right? You kind of have to guide them through that as an arborist, you know, tell them where trees would be the best, which trees on the property are healthiest, which is a really good stand of trees that's going to help shelter the house from heat, right? Or from the wind. And it all depends on the location, the health and the size and species of the trees on the parcel. So your plan is developed always by a registered forester or a certified arborist. At least that's what we would like to see. A lot of times what we get designing plans as landscape architects, and unfortunately, they may not all look at what the tree's going to look like when it's mature. But hey, that triple trunk river birch looks really nice as a baby. Unfortunately, as it grows older, it just splits apart, right? So we're strongly pushing for arborists to be involved or registered foresters at the beginning of a project, right? To actually design for this construction with trees in mind. I mean, obviously the tree on the right has so many problems. Is that one you really want somebody to save just because they can? You know, if it's backwards, not going to affect anything in the middle of a stand, maybe you want to save that, but has it got something that's going to spread to other trees? Maybe we don't want to save that, you know? So all this stuff you have to take into consideration. All right, so how does the construction actually go? Well, usually the first thing that's done is a site clearing and demolition if there's an existing structure that they want to build a new one, right? So they're going to tear that down. They're going to clear the site so they can get the good compactable soils. They're going to haul off the topsoil. That's usually the first thing they do. And we're trying to get them to save that stockpile of topsoil so that they can just spread it back on site. It would make the whole thing much easier for whatever, trees or plants or sod that they're going to put in. But a lot of these construction sites are very small, so you'd have to plan in advance where you're going to put that topsoil. Things to think about. The next thing that happens after clearing and demolition is your rough grading to create the contours that they want. Remember me talking about how the water has to flow away from the foundation and things like that? So they're going to rough grade it so that they get a lot pad in order to build a house on, or whatever building. And then they're going to make sure it all falls away and goes into a drainage system that they're designing right to trap and treat, because they've taken all the trees that used to trap and treat the water out. Right. So again, being involved in that plan at the beginning is really an important thing. The next thing that goes on is the installation of utilities, water, storm drains, sanitary sewer systems, those underground sewer systems, right? Then they grade for the establishment of their final lot pad where they're going to actually build structure. They're making it really nice level, making sure it's the size it needs to be. They're going to surface the roads, they're going ahead and laying down their gravel and their bases and making sure they have compaction on the roadway. And then at the end, their construction of the roads and the actual buildings, right? Curb and gutter, things like that, and the street toppings and the building and installation of the final utilities, right? Coming off the main lines to each lot, if you're in a subdivision. And then they're doing what's called lot prep, or fine grading and installation of landscape. Now, as arborists, you may have done a great job up to that point in keeping the trees protected that were supposed to be protected. But now the landscapers come in and they want to grade right up to the trunks of the trees with those wonderful little bobcats and things that they have and make it all nice and smooth so their sod will do well. Yeah, that phase usually damages a lot more trees than the rest of the construction phase. So this is one you really have to watch them in, because in their minds, they don't think they're hurting the trees. Okay, they think they're just prepping it, and that's going to help the tree too. They don't think about compaction. They don't think about the grass is now going to be over the top of the tree's root system, getting everything the tree needed. So these are the last steps, and where I think, aside from the start of the project, the end of the project, you need to be very, very, very watchful. So what is your role exactly as an arborist? Well, one, you've got to understand the aspects of construction. You have to know those phases, right? And you have to know that underground construction aspects that occur underground, and become familiar with common terminology or work procedures. I hate to say this, but if you're a female in the industry, you really need to know your stuff, unfortunately, because it's hard for guys on construction sites to listen to you as a woman sometimes. And I don't mean anything bad against the guys. Guys do a great job, but they're just not used to seeing women out in the field in a construction site setting. So it really helps if when you get to the site, you know their terminology, you know what a set of plans looks like, you know how to read those plans. That makes them automatically think different about you. Now you're a professional in the industry and they begin to see you that way. And I've been fighting that for years, but we're getting there. So make sure, guys, girls, either one, when you go on a site, you have got to know the construction terms, terminology, and how to read a site plan if you're going to get into that line of work as an arborist. It's a crucial need. We're going to need more and more of you, but you have to understand the site plans, the terminology, or they're not going to listen. It's like turning a switch off. Oh yeah, they're talking about trees. They don't want to hear that. So you make it important to them. Hey, this is saving you money. It's keeping your site cool. It's taking up stormwater. These trees are actually part of your stormwater system, and you get credits for saving them now in a lot of the stormwater codes. So once you can talk to them and they understand that, then it becomes a little easier to get them to prevent that damage, right? To keep them out of that tree area. Then the trees aren't just something that they are a nuisance that they have to keep because some code says so. Wait a minute, that's actually saving me money. I don't have to make my detention pond that big, right? So that's preventing that damage before it occurs. It's not just making sure that the tree protection fences are up. Preventing that damage also means making them understand this is why you need those trees and this is why this is important to make sure the guys stay out of there, right? All right, and grading and excavation can severely damage a tree's root system. That goes without saying. The severity depends on the proximity to the tree. The closer they get to the tree, the more damage they do. How they damage the tree. If they do a line accidentally too far in towards the trunk, yeah, that's going to cut some things, but it's not half as bad as if they went across the tree's trunk, right? Because then you're severing that entire root structure. Think of them as a pie. You're cutting across the pie, you've cut off that whole piece. If you accidentally make a cut into the trunk, that may be something a tree can survive from because you've only cut that very small section, right? So get them to understand that, you know, how the tree grows, what it needs, what damage is the worst for the tree. You know, maybe if we can make them understand trees, then we won't have as much damage in the long run. Also, your arborist's role is to enforce that tree protection zone, right? So you can assist with the changes in the field before they decide to, hey, we got to move this somewhere, we've hit rock, whatever. You want to be involved in that. You want to make sure your clients know that up front, right? That you want to be involved if there's a change, a field change that has to happen with structures, especially near your trees. Monitor the injuries to trees, provide corrective action right away. If that accident happens, we want to get those roots covered back up where they accidentally dug too far, right? The quicker we can get help to these trees, the less bad it is if it's a thing that the tree can recover from, right? Constantly communicate with your project superintendent. You know, let him know, hey, I'm going to be out here making a weekly inspection. Don't tell him the day. Because if you do, he'll make sure everything's perfect the day you're out there. He's covered up everything that you would have worried about. Just say weekly, I'm going to show up. Now, I don't know when, I'll just drive by, right? Hopefully that keeps them on their toes a little bit. And facilitate completion of the project. Don't just say, you know, here's the plan and that's it. You know, I've done the plan for you. These are the trees that need to be saved. You really need to make sure that you are saying it needs so many inspections during these phases. And at the final phase, there's going to be a last final inspection. I like to do 2 inspections at the final end. One at lot prep. I want to meet the guys putting in the final landscaping. And then I want to go back out and see them once it's done, right? So I want a final inspection when everything's completed. And I want that inspection with the landscaper before they start. That way I can talk to them too, because the information may not get relayed, right? So enforce the tree protection zone, assist with changes in the field, monitor injuries to trees and provide corrective action as soon as possible. Communicate with that superintendent and facilitate completion of the project. Go all the way to the end. So how do we prevent damage? Well, protecting desirable trees, you want to save the ones, like I said, that are good species. They're going to be able to withstand whatever is being done. Maybe they can handle a little bit of water change. Large specimen trees, historic trees have to be preserved. You want to protect at a minimum that critical root zone. And you see that asterisk? That's because the critical root zone, the CRZ, is usually defined by the municipality or county that you're in. To my knowledge, there aren't any statewide tree ordinances that affect critical root zones. Those, like I said, are done by individual municipalities or counties implement those tree conservation ordinances. So you want to check where the district that you're at, the municipality that you're at, what is their critical root zone? 1.25 times the diameter of breast height at breast height of the tree. Or is it 1 for 1? You want 1 foot for 1 inch of diameter at breast height? It may be 1.75 times the diameter of the trunk. It's different for different jurisdictions. So just make sure you look at that and know what it is. Usually they're at least to the drip line. Most of the time they're beyond the drip line because we all know as arborists that that's the biggest part of the tree is underground, right? So we want to save as much of that root as possible. How do we prevent that damage? Well, specifications helps. Write down onto the plan and put in construction specifications. Include exact details so that everyone understands the purpose in layman's terms. Don't get technical on them. You know, we must protect this tree. The fence must be up at all times. It must be 30 feet from the trunk of the tree. If it gets knocked down for whatever reason, stand it back up. If it gets knocked down and equipment goes into the root zone, call the site arborist. I mean, you want to make it that clear, you know, in your details. Post signs as a reminder. We also, I've got an example of a sign here that says warning tree protection, this fence and other protective measures shall not be altered or removed. Activity resulting in tree damage could be the result in a fine or imprisonment. Some jurisdictions will arrest you if they catch you in a tree protection zone with equipment. Who the contact number is, and that the site is constantly being monitored. So you don't ever want to tell them when you're coming out there, just that you're going to be coming out there, right? And like I said, most jurisdictions build in their codes those fines and penalties, but I've even seen construction owners and superintendents put up their own fine schedule. If they find a contractor, a subcontractor knocking down their equipment, they're going to charge them $500 if they knock down all that silt fence they put in or the tree protection they put up. So some of the sites do it themselves. It just depends, and that's stuff you want to talk about and put in your specifications. So we want to try to avoid damage during construction by putting in barriers, right? Barriers are usually construction fences around trees to be protected. Subcontractors and equipment operators have to understand the purpose of the barriers. That orange line of tree protection fence is not what they aim for with the bulldozer as they go down the line. They need to know that. We don't want to be anywhere near that orange fence if we can help it, right? It's to protect the trees. Signage identifying a tree protection zone should always be installed. And remember, if you see TPZ, it means tree protection zone. Keep people and materials, wastes, extra soils out of those protected areas. No, it's not the perfect place to park your truck. No, it's not the perfect place to drop off that package of lumber. No, it's not the perfect place to throw your garbage from the site, and that way it's contained and not blowing around on the construction site. Nope. Know all those things. Make sure they know all those things. Limit access. Only allow one access route on and off the property. That's a big one. It's required under the best management practices for construction sites in every jurisdiction through the NPDES, the National Pollutant and Discharge Elimination System. They are only allowed one construction exit or entrance. And if you can keep them on that path, that means they're not cutting through and driving over your protected trees, right? So one route on and off property makes it a lot easier. All right, that critical root zone, or CRZ, right, is the area under the tree's roots that must be protected to ensure its future survival. Again, that critical root zone is the area under the trees where the roots must be protected to ensure its future survival. It's the area where no construction activities are allowed. Different states, different cities specify different minimum CRZs, like I said before, so be sure to check with your local ordinances before initiating that tree protection plan. How do we reduce compaction before it happens? Well, there's lots of different ways we can do that. We can add mulch 6 to 12 inches deep to disperse the weight of that construction equipment. You can place large plywood or steel sheets, or use trackway pads or mats or other protection systems. But remember, if you're using the mulch, you've got to remove that as carefully as soon as possible, because 6 to 12 inches of mulch, remember that rain can't penetrate through that, right? So it's only a temporary thing. You can back it off with a machine, you can use rakes, but you've got to be really careful so you're not digging down into the soil. That's why I prefer to write on their hand removal only. But you can also use like a tarp underneath that first, then the mulch, then the mats. I mean, it's up to you how you're going to set it up, but you've got to only leave that on temporarily to allow construction back and forth to get the materials to the back, whatever it is, so we don't damage and compact the soils under the tree's root zone. So the one on the left, those are track mats, and they're made of recycled rubber. And you can see they've laid the path through between these trees to be able to access with the equipment to the back and get the materials back there. On this side, on the middle, you've got plywood that's been laid down over plywood, right? So they're making levels of plywood and just stacking it and using that to drive back and forth to the construction area. And on the right, you're seeing the steel mats that they lay down. In this instance, they're going over and around a tree that's in the sidewalk. So that's a city tree. They wanted them to save and not compact. So they used the steel mats from sidewalk to more steel mats on down to protect the tree while they were doing it. So here are some examples of tree protection zones. You know, a lot of people use the orange construction fence. We found that's easily pushed over, as you can see in the back on the left image. The silt fence is beginning to get pushed by the mound of dirt that's being stored back there on top of part of that tree's critical root system. Again, you want to get them to get that stockpile off as soon as possible. The longer it stays, the more compacted that soil becomes, and definitely no water's getting through that. On the right, you see where they've used temporary chain link. This method is really good as long as there's not sediment washing into the tree protection zone, because again, fine clays in the sediment that gets moved on a rain event will get washed in and again clog up the airspace. So you may need to add something like hay bales or straw wattles along this edge of the chain link fence to keep it from getting silted. So just keep that in mind. But these are two different methods that are utilized. What we'd love to see is the cannons. No, I'm kidding. Just a joke to, you know, lighten up the mood and give us a break. Wouldn't that be nice though, boy? You just put the cannons up there. I dare you to drive into this tree zone. Anyway, I digress. What we end up getting though is these methods. You know, we'll see the wood and orange fence mix where they're doing it out of construction reused construction material, which is great. In the center, that's another type of temporary chain link fence. Looks really good for this setup. And then on the right is a good example of, that's a construction orange, which is, I'm not crazy about just the construction orange, but it does work, especially if you've got these bright signs on there saying tree protection area, warning, keep out, danger, Will Robinson, whatever it takes to get their attention, right? And in our code, we spec'd in with our new tree protection ordinance using these signs both in English and in Spanish. So they have to have both because of a lot of the construction guys don't speak English, but they read and write Spanish beautifully. So put it out there in both, you know, and that way there's no mistakes that this is a tree protection area. Stay out of it, right? Oh, let's talk a minute about grade changes. Okay, so grade changes can be devastating to trees, even if not severe, right? The amount of root system that will remain after grading, the tree's age, its species tolerance to root loss. Some trees handle it better than others, right? The degree to which the grade is lowered, how much is it being lowered, right? What are your soil conditions? What is your soil type? And are you going to irrigate the tree? All that's going to affect the tree's possibility of survival. Changes in hydrology and soil-water relations can also affect that tree's survivability. You're making a grade change now, you're giving the water to the tree in larger amounts than it can handle, right? Especially in a clay soil, that's bad, right? The tree island that's created, sometimes they want to try and save a tree, and in order to do that, they got to make all these cuts. So they create these tree islands. They construct those where grades have to be lowered, but in those, you really have to include as much of the root system as possible. The bigger, the better. And unfortunately, we don't always get that in a tree island. So those are tricky. Increases in grade may require aeration systems, right? So if you're adding additional soils, you may have to then go back and decompact and make some air holes back into that soil, maybe putting in pipes to keep that open so that it can constantly get air to those root systems, right? Remember, that straw is not going to draw if it can't get air. Tree wells can be effective if you have enough space to get them in, right? And that's the trick with these. There's a wonderful picture of one on the right here. You know, they're building up grade around the back, so they're trying to put in a retaining wall, and then they're going to try and keep the tree where it is. Well, if you have one like that, that one might actually work. But the whole trick is, are they getting enough water? Do they have enough space? Have you compacted the soil? If so, you're going to have to decompact the soil around it, right, before you're done. Locate those at the drip line or beyond. If you don't get them to at least the drip lines, they're not going to work. You know, I've seen them maybe 2 feet, 5 feet from the trunk underneath the drip line. They usually don't survive. You know, it's a miracle if they do. And there are a couple of species that can do it. Crepe myrtle springs to mind. As much as some people hate crepe myrtles, they really are one of the tougher working trees out there. So that's tree wells for you. Excavation of utility lines. This is one of the last things done usually in a new development or build. Sometimes they're not considered, especially in poor tree protection plans. Boy, if you're not considering where the utilities are going to be, you're missing a big problem. It can be added with minimal damage using tunneling, boring, or the air spade devices, right, to clear the roots and get them in. But like I said, a lot of times people just don't think about that utility, and then that's a big problem at the very end. Ooh, soil contamination. I can't tell you how many times on the construction site I've seen painters walk out to a beautifully pine straw tree protection area, remove the pine straw, and that's where they're going to clean out their paint sprayer. And then they just put the pine straw back over it and think we won't notice. Well, I'm one of those arborists that goes and moves pine straw when I'm checking on a final. But it all starts at trying to prevent that soil contamination that can kill and damage trees. They have to have things like in the center, you see this paint washout station. That's a mobile device. The painters can wash their stuff out there, right? The one on the left is a containment system for cement. And they make these things in roll-offs from a truck. You roll off this dumpster looking thing, and that's where they wash out their cement in these large construction and development projects. But most pollution control plans now require them to trap that cement and put it somewhere and then haul it off at the end phase, right? A lot of times it's reused, but that's where you want them doing it, not in the tree save area. You want them using these temporary paint washout stations, not your tree save area. For the chemical storage, the hydraulic fluid, there are, catchment mats they can put under this stuff to keep it from seeping into the ground and into your tree's root zone. So you've got to prevent that soil contamination because that can kill and damage trees. Have them clean up fuel, hydraulic leaks. If they know they've got a piece of equipment that's leaking, they're supposed to get mats under that so that it's not going into the groundwater, right? And into your tree root zone. It shouldn't be near your tree root zone to start with, but that's, sometimes a guy just parks there. So you really have to watch that. And like I said, don't allow the paint dumping. Make sure they have the washout areas. That's how we avoid the soil contamination. All right, so what are the symptoms of construction damage? Well, this tree on the right was actually on a construction site, and you can see how it's starting to die on the left. And if you were to look underneath that left-hand side of this tree in the picture, you would see that's where the new house was constructed, just at the edge of that, where that dead branch Y's, right? So obviously the tree is now starting to die where the roots were severed, and eventually the whole tree was dead. And it took maybe 3 years, but that was when we had a write up with the builder at the end phase because their equipment got in and damaged the critical root zone. We put a bond on it and they had to remove the tree and plant 2 or 3 new trees back. And they also got a ticket for that one, but that's beside the point. Anyway, so trees with fewer and smaller leaves happen, right? You get trunk sprouts, these water sprouts, some people call them suckers that pop up. So the tree is in shock, it's in stress, and it's throwing out every leaf and opening every bud it can to try and get more energy. The problem is there's not enough roots now to take up enough water and nutrient to make that cycle happen. So it begins a cycle of decline, right? Visible wounds or decay fungi on the trees, trunks, and branches where it may have been accidentally bashed. You're going to see yellowing and browning of leaves. The tree could just, if it's a chemical thing, the tree could just die overnight, right? If they dumped chemicals on it, that's going to cause demise extremely quickly. Damage can occur quickly, like I said, with the chemicals or whatever, or like I said, for compaction or root cutting that you didn't catch, 5 to 7 years, and then the tree is dead. So it's a slow cycle of decline, or it can happen quickly, depending on what the construction damage was. Are there other protection methods? Well, yes, there are some things to help the trees. If those roots have to be cut, if there's going to come in and make that cut we were talking about, maybe to get a wall in, so it's not a cut across the root system, it's in toward the trunk minimally, then you can have the roots cut cleanly, not torn. You're using a sawzall or something with a sharp edge to cut those roots so that they compartmentalize easier. Tunneling should be done under more valuable and older specimen trees. Unwanted trees are carefully removed so nearby trees are not damaged. How do you do that? Well, they want to pop the stump. Well, then they can make a clean root prune around the edge of that tree, right? Before they rip that stump. Then they're not ripping out the roots of all the trees around it. Or better yet, they can just grind this or leave the stump. It's not going to hurt anything. It's probably, especially if it's on the edges of a construction site. There's lots of ways to do that. Lots of ways to do that so you don't damage the trees around it. Mulch and plywood, like I said, can be used as a root bridge over traffic areas to reduce that soil compaction. And then tree trunks can be wrapped with fabric. I've seen people use fabric and then hay bales stood up and kind of tied around the tree to keep anybody from bashing into it. It's a good idea. If you're going to create a root bridge, expect the unexpected. Go ahead and wrap that tree trunk in hay bales. It's a temporary measure. You don't want to leave that on. Once they've gotten the materials back there, then you want to go ahead and take that off. But yeah, so there are ways to minimize damage. So for care after construction, like we said, you can do certain things that are going to help the tree survive if they're done quickly enough. Treat the wounds on the trunk by bark tracing, giving it a clean edge so the tree can compartmentalize around that wound easier than a jagged edge, right? Aerate, use other soil aeration methods to reintroduce oxygen and reduce the compaction. Like I said, air spade methods, radial compaction, using a drill to give airspace back into that soil. But I swear the air tools, or compressed air tools, and there's several on the market now, do a really fabulous job in decompaction. Water them deeply. That encourages new root development and reduces the tree stress, right? Unless they're getting too much water, then you wouldn't want to water them. But for ones that were, affected by construction and haven't been getting enough water, you definitely want to do the deep watering. Inspect them frequently. Look for visible signs of insect or disease attack. When they go into stress, it's like ringing a dinner bell for some of these pests. So you really want to watch to make sure they're not getting pine beetles if it's a pine tree, right? Things like that. Mulch them well, but correctly, not up against the trunk, right? We keep that mulch off the trunk and we don't do more than how many inches? Think back. Yep, you remembered. All right, fertilize. We don't really recommend that. It is not for stressed trees. Notice that's highlighted and boldened. Fertilize, not for stressed trees. You can fertilize in a year or two after they've recovered from construction stress based on soil analysis. So you shouldn't be just throwing out fertilizer because you can. It's not really going to help. In fact, it can do more damage on a tree that's already in stress. So fertilization, not for stressed trees. All right, how do we mitigate compaction? Oh boy, like I talked about, you can do vertical mulching, which is making holes with a drill or an air tool, and then filling that hole with like a compost or other organic material, right, loosely. Radial trenching, you're making a trench in a radial pattern throughout the root zone. He's doing a radial trenching with this air spade. You can see the channels that he's created, right? And that's how you do that. And then you backfill that again with a native soil or compost, and using that air excavator, which is what he's using in this tool on the bottom to reduce compaction, remove excess fill soil, and it improves the soil conditions. So that's the compaction mitigation. Those three methods work really well. So just to throw out there, is this a good idea? The lot owner that bought this lot loved this tree and didn't have enough space. It was a very tiny lot. So they decided with their designer and their arborist, not me, but I do know where this lot is. It is in the metro area in Atlanta. They decided to undertake this project and save this water oak. So they adjusted the roof, and every year or two, they come out and readjust the holes in the roof and readjust the base, the steps have been cut as the tree's gotten a little bigger or it's moved in wind events. They do regular pruning. They do regular treatments on it. I don't know if I would want this, but it's worked. And there were a lot of us that saw this going in and said, we're counting it as a loss because it probably won't survive. But that was 10 years ago and the tree's still there. So is it a good idea? Maybe, maybe not. It's up to you. And there's a whole lot of work involved if you've got a client that wants to do this kind of project. Just something to look at and talk about. All right, let's get into the next one. Oh, what fun. Look at all those happy urban arborists applying for their urban forestry stuff. All right, so this is the urban forestry chapter. We're going to talk about what that is exactly. All right, here we go. So chapter 14, like I said, urban forestry. We're going to go over the benefits, costs, and value of trees, the role of the urban forester in the urban planning process, planning and conducting a tree inventory, and then urban forestry management plans, something every municipality and county needs. So urban forestry. Urban forestry is the management of naturally occurring and planted trees and associated plants in urban areas. The focus is on larger populations of trees, the urban forest. So there's a reason that they're saying that definition, just make sure you remember. Arboriculture is the practice and study of the care of trees or other woody plants in the landscape. And its focus is on single trees or groupings of trees. So the urban forestry is the management of larger populations of trees in the whole urban forest. And arboriculture is the practice and study of the care of trees and other woody plants. And the focus is singular or with groupings of trees. All right. So your tree care manager, they have lots of different titles. You might be the urban forester for your village. You might be a municipal arborist in your town or city. You might be the city forester. You could be a tree warden. They have lots of tree wardens in the UK and now starting to be up north too. And tree officers, that might be another thing that your title is. All of them are tree care managers. And they all work to improve the urban environment using trees and other plants while managing all the associated risks and costs. A lot of times they work with urban planners, landscape architects, civil engineers, public works officials, government agencies, and the public in general. You're going to deal with all that as a tree care manager. So you're dealing with the benefits and costs of trees. So those benefits include all the environmental improvements they do, right? The aesthetic enhancements, the economic savings, the social health and well-being. We all feel better when we're walking in through the trees in a shaded, especially in the summer, in a shaded area, or walking on a path when the leaves are changing color and it's so beautiful, right? It just makes you feel better. But the costs of that include planting the trees, maintaining those trees, managing those trees, right? Trees are an asset unless not properly cared for or managed. Then they may become liabilities, right? So it's a lot of work, but there's a lot of benefit. Some of the environmental benefits of trees, well, we know they give off air, right? They improve the air quality. They give off oxygen. They collect and filter airborne pollutants. So they're doing a big job of that, especially near the streets, all these wonderful street trees. They shade the ground. They reduce those surface temperatures. They reduce that heat island, right? They do carbon sequestration. Lovely trees. They store carbon in the form of wood or other tissues. The greenhouse effect is an increase in carbon concentrations to levels that trap heat. There's a reason they put that definition in there. That greenhouse effect is an increase in carbon concentration to levels that trap heat. Some carbon is returned to the atmosphere through burning or the decomposition process. But this is the environmental benefits that trees give us. Those economic benefits, well, they reduce costs for heating and cooling. 10 degrees cooler, you can take a little temperature gauge and it's 10 degrees cooler under the shade of a tree than it is standing out there in the parking lot, right? Who wants to fight for that tree shade at the local grocery store? I do. Yeah, we all want to park under that tree shade. It increases your property values. Let's face it, I'd rather go buy a house that had trees shading it than not, just stuck on a, some people like that look, but not me. So most of the time it increases property values. Business, it attracts businesses, residents, visitors to a community. You have a tree-lined community downtown corridor, and all of a sudden you have people wanting to walk there because it's cooler, right? Or it's prettier when the leaves change. Or maybe you have blooming trees planted, and then you have spring too, that it's so pretty underneath those trees. I'd like to shop there. That looks like a great place, right? Your savings vary with the climate and the location of the trees and the size and species of the trees. So obviously bigger trees are going to shade more, take up more water, right? But even smaller trees can help. Larger deciduous trees located on the south and west sides of buildings typically contribute the most for air conditioning. Deciduous trees, though, in those same ones, they allow more sunlight through when they drop their trees and leaves in the winter. So they're allowing the sunlight to warm the building in winter. Trees can also serve as windbreaks. Oklahoma, where the wind goes whipping across the plains. Hey, they may like a nice screening set to block that whipping wind, right? Yeah, I would. All right, more of those economic benefits. Well, they've determined that property values, both residential and commercial, are higher with trees. So the house on the left in this picture at the bottom is going to be worth more than the house on the right, even though, maybe the same construction, but the fact that it lacks trees reduces its overall cost, right? Sales and property tax revenue is increased when it's a treed lot in a treed area. Trees shape and protect pavements, shade and protect pavements, reducing that heat load, and other hardscapes from degrading. They may keep your deck or that fence from breaking down faster if it's that poly stuff especially. And it reduces the cost of maintenance, right, and replacement. The social and psychological benefits of trees. Well, let's face it, people are drawn to areas with trees, particularly in the cities. Trees are part of a cultural heritage. Gosh, they planted those old trees. I can't remember how old those things are. They were from the Queen's Silver Jubilation or Jubilee, Silver Jubilee over in England. Those trees are still alive and they're doing well. And I mean, that is part of that street's heritage, that we planted these for the Queen's big celebration and they're still here and they're still growing and everybody still talks about it. So they're part of cultural heritage. The stress when you're around a tree is reduced greatly, right? Just helps you feel better, They've proven that hospital recovery times are shorter if people look out their windows and see trees than the poor person that's stuck on the interior window that looks at the building across the street, right? It's just not as relaxing and calming. So that's been documented. Behavioral improvements in children result from exposure to natural settings. I mean, they feel better out playing in nature than they would on a cement playground, right? Not to say that basketball could be played better in the trees. We all know basketball better on a basketball court. But when they go cool off and take those breaks, if they can run into a tree shaded area, they're going to feel a lot better than if they're just sitting on that hot bench next to the pavement, right? Trees help reduce certain types of crime. Don't know why, but it seems to have a calming effect on everybody, right? You see in a pretty tree, maybe you're not thinking so much about robbing somebody. Who knows? I don't know where that one came from, but it's possible. A pretty area, maybe you're not going to do that kind of stuff. Who knows? Trees are an important element in therapeutic gardens and restorative health settings. They've started planting gardens for people that are recovering from long-term stuff. They can take them for a stroll in those gardens and it helps them recover faster. It's been medically proven. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the money end of things, the costs. There is a cost. There's the cost of tree planting and establishment, right? Maintenance of tree health and safety. You have to think about watering the trees. Without water, especially in that first year or two, they're not going to survive. So you've got to irrigate them or you've got to set up watering schedules. Pruning. You have to prune the trees, especially if they're street trees, because you've got to have clearance, right? You don't want a truck come along bashing it and killing the tree, right? Plant health care. You got to think about what pests may be coming. Like we have to now worry about the emerald ash borer that came down from the north, right? Didn't have to worry about that one for a while, but now we do. Same thing with the pests coming up from the south, or from our ports, like the ambrosia beetle. Thank you very much. That's affecting everything around here. So you've got to preemptively treat these trees to keep them from dying from these new pests. Debris cleanup. You're going to have debris fall off trees in storms. There's just no way around it. When the wind load is high enough, branches break, trees fall down in a high enough storm event. So you have to plan for cleanup of that. And where's all that going to go? Risk management. Hey, maybe if we can, plant a cluster here, they act better in a group, right? So you got to design that, plant it. You also have to maybe look at your trees and determine which ones are higher risk. Can you treat them? Can you prune them? Is it just better to go ahead and remove that tree before you expect that summer hurricane season or yearly time when the thunderstorms happen frequently? That's all part of your risk management. And that costs money. Costs vary according to the tree species, size, and location. The biggest trees under power lines are going to cost the most. I can tell you that right now. Trees that are set way in a backyard where there's no access, that's going to cost a lot because you're going to have to bring in a crane. So it just depends on, where they are and how big they are and what they're near as to how much they're going to cost. You do valuations and appraisals. There are several approaches to doing evaluation and appraisal of trees. Real estate value, comparable properties with and without trees are all analyzed. They take all that into account. They can be quantified based on the various benefits, right? This tree is definitely taking up this much stormwater every year. That's a benefit, right? And that can be quantified. The cost benefit analysis is based on a tree's measurements, species, condition, and location. So you can actually go online to some of these benefit calculators, like the one in iTree, and it has a set of assignment and management tools to calculate the collective cost benefit analysis for populations of trees based on inventory data. You can also do single trees on the National Benefits Calculator on the Arbor Day site. That will actually let you put in your tree, whether it's a zip code first, because it's doing just the trees in your area. And then it takes in the size of the tree, what type tree, and it gives you an analysis of how much water that tree uptakes, how much carbon it sequesters, how much pollution it takes in, how much air conditioning value it's giving back. And it puts that into a dollar amount. So you can get this stuff from either iTree or National Benefits Calculator to determine what that valuation and appraisal is on that tree, right? How much is it worth? What benefits is it giving our community or the homeowner? Doing the appraisals on a tree, there are a couple different methods. There's the CTLA methodology developed by the Council of Tree and Landscape Appraisers, right? CTLA is the Council of Tree and Landscape Appraisers. It uses tree size, species, condition, and location information. Then there's the replacement cost method that is used in the event of a loss of a tree. So you're finding out how much the tree it would be to replace that tree, right, at the size it is. The trunk formula method is used for trees too large to replace. So you get like a 20-inch tree or a 30-inch tree. You can't just go buy a 4-inch caliper tree, plop it in the ground and expect it to be equivalent. It's not. So in that situation, you use the trunk formula and you determine the amount of the tree per inches. It factors in a bunch of different things, size, location, whether it's a focal point tree. And at the end of that method, then you have a dollar amount that the tree is worth on each one of these. And you can look that up on your own for the different methods and what they do. But just know that there's those different methods. Those three particularly are mentioned. So in planning, urban foresters have to work with city planners and engineers to incorporate trees into the urban planning process and the urban environment. Trees are part of a city's green infrastructure. They're going to help and give the city benefits in cooling and water uptake and producing air and trapping, pollution. Urban foresters have to convey the growing space needs of those trees and include the suitable soil volumes. Hey, without enough soil volume, I can't get to be a mature tree, right? And what kind of soil characteristic is best for that type tree? And then is there enough adequate root space and water resources for that tree to mature? If we're only going to plant a short-term tree, then let's be realistic about that this tree is only going to be here for 10, 20 years, and then we're going to have to plant a new one. Or let's give it the space it needs, even if we have to rip up some sidewalk, dig it out, put in some good soils and some natural soil cells to give the tree the space that it needs to. Hey, let's pipe some of those down drain gutters into that vault. And hey, now you have a trap and treatment system, right? That's all part of your city's green infrastructure. And more municipalities are starting to look at that as a benefit and a way to reduce the cost of treating and trapping water, right? So you don't need those big detention ponds and cleanup facilities when you can give it back to the tree and let the tree absorb it and put it back into nature, right? But that's what it is. The trees are part of that green infrastructure in the urban planning process. All right, so what is green infrastructure? Talking about that, Kay. Well, the natural resources upon which the city is built. Green infrastructure, unlike gray infrastructure, that appreciates over time, right? A cement pipe is going to depreciate over time because it starts to break down, right? But that tree, that green infrastructure is going to appreciate because it's getting bigger and bigger and doing more benefits, taking up more water for your community, right? Understanding and communication on the function and value of the urban forest is essential in local and regional infrastructure planning. So you've got to plan for this ahead of time. It's not something that's going to happen, off the top of your head. This takes time to plan, to get funds for, to get the process going, to get everyone on board with it, and to have everyone understand what this is going to do for you and the benefits you're going to gain from it as a community. All right, so wilderness parks, greenways, conservation easements, working lands, and street right-of-ways, that's all part of your green infrastructure. It supports native species. If you're in an urban area, like a metro area, it may only support like squirrels and things like that, but still part of that native species in the area, right? It maintains your natural ecological processes. It sustains your air and water resources, and again, contributes to the health and quality of life around you. Green infrastructure, I don't think people realize how important it really is. I mean, imagine your city or town with no trees at all. And that'd be a pretty bleak landscape, not to mention hard to breathe and very hot. So, all right, sustainability. What is sustainability? Well, it's the ability to maintain ecological, social, and economic benefits over a period of time. That's sustainability, right? Ensuring sustainability definitely requires planning. Trees have a limited lifespan. So planning for succession tree planting programs, that's critical. Even in the natural forests, you have trees of different sizes growing up together, right? And as one older tree starts to succumb and may die off, it sheds its carbons to the other trees around it. And those coming up next are receiving the benefit. And, you have trees of varying ages growing all the time. That's just a way a forest works. So in an urban forest, those life cycles are going to be reduced a bit because our compacted soils, our limited space, the heat loads we put on them, yada, 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 right? So you have to plan for, okay, this street tree, even in the best conditions, is going to only last 50 to 60 years, right? I know this because we've watched trees in the past, right? So now I have to plan on, as trees die out from whatever reason, a pest, old age, maybe it ran out of root space, maybe it didn't get enough water, whatever the situation, maybe a truck hit it, you never know, in an urban setting. Now I'm going to have to replace it. So I have to plan on replacement trees coming back in so that we don't lose all the trees at one time, right? So you've got to plan ahead for that. That planning is critical. Maintaining an abundant mature trees in the urban forest helps maximize those benefits, but at the same time, they're all the same age, then you've got nobody coming up to replace them, right? And things happen, so you're going to have to replace them. It's good and it's bad at the same time. But sustainability means planning for that long term and having the plans in place to replace the trees as they go. Tree inventories. Now, these are done to record the location, characteristics, and assessment of individual trees and groups of trees over a well-defined area. So within your city jurisdiction, you can even do it by neighborhoods or blocks. It's used for management, planning, budgeting. We know this street trees aren't doing so well here. We're going to have to replace them. So we're going to budget for that. For emergency preparedness, we know this Holder historic neighborhood has trees that are starting to begin the decline, right? They're starting a cycle of decline. And so we know that we may lose those in a big wind event. I mean, we've done our preparation. We've budgeted for having to do some for pruning and things like that, but still we know they're older and they're susceptible. So you want to have that budgeted to take care of those things. Emergency preparedness in your response for those storms. Documentation of actions taken. What maintenance have you done? That may help you cover some legal issues. If you can prove that, hey, we had a regular cycle of pruning and inspection on our street trees, and nobody called us to say, they noticed something strange on this tree. The last time we looked at it, it was fine. Well, now they're trying to sue you and say you didn't take care of the trees. Now you've got your documentation to say, yes, we checked this, once a year. We had a pruning schedule set up, and at the last known inspection, we had no issues with this tree. You've documented all that. Very important. And it helps to remember when you need to do those maintenance items, right? You have that set up on a list. Assessment of structure, how the trees formed, its function, its value in the urban forest. All that is done on an inventory. And then communicating the benefits of urban trees and forest to policymakers and decision makers in your community. If you can show the hard numbers of what this tree does as far as water uptake, pollution sequestration, carbon sequestration, even reducing temperatures, that is big right now with trying to reduce the climate problem. And your decision makers and policymakers are starting to sit up and take notice when you say, hey, we can reduce this heat island over this parking lot if you just incorporate trees. So it's a way to get them on board with what needs to happen to reduce climate problems. Okay, so inventories they readily provide information on individual trees, or like I said, on groups of trees through statistical analysis. A tree canopy cover can be calculated and measured. That's something that we can see from the air, and we can calculate how much and how little there is in places, right? Vacant planting spaces can be identified so that you can start a planting program there where you don't have the number of trees. This is an example at the bottom of New York City's street tree map. And you can see the little dots outlined for different types of trees. You can click on New York tree inventory map and it'll tell you what the tree is, what its closest address, what the tree care activity has been on that tree. So that's a really cool little tool to have, right? Oh, don't tell me you're frozen again. Hello. All right, we'll go out and come back. Nope, there it is. Okay. All right, so this is a copy of Decatur's inventory map from 2012, and it shows you in the green dots where we have trees that were planted. And if you look in area 2 in the northwest, you can see that we had planted our downtown quarter there, but we still had areas left that we needed to plant for street trees. And we identified all the water features, our storm sewer lines, because you don't really want to plant over major utility lines, because then when they have a problem, they're going to rip your tree up too. So you got to take all that into account. But that's kind of what our first one looked like in 2012. Just takes these a minute to load. Oh, I know you can do it. There it is. Okay, so this is our current map. And you can see we've added in a lot more. That northwest portion is up on the upper left where you see that kind of bend that says West Ponce de Leon Avenue. And at the beginning, we just had the lower corner kind of planted there. Well, now we've spread out everywhere since 2012. And it gives us, again, a way to track where we still need trees. So I can see the areas where there's no green dots. And I know that's where I need to focus on next year for planting, right? It's just a really handy way to keep track of what you're doing. So here's a comparison that shows the 2012 from the current inventory. I think this was 2019 or 20 on the right. But you see the area that I was talking about where we had no trees on the 12 map, and on the right, you can see that those areas have all been planted now. So we just keep adding trees, looking where we don't have trees, monitoring the ones we have, and then adding more. So there's different types of tree inventories that you can do. You can do random sampling that kind of provides a large scale picture of the arbored forest. You're just going to random spots and checking the conditions of the trees and what's there. You can do a partial tree inventory, and that's used to collect information for one or more specific portions of that urban forest, right? So maybe in that area that we defined as 2, maybe that would be our partial tree inventory to see what's going on there in that section of the urban forest. It may fit better to a limited budget, and you can spread that cost over a number of years. Depending on your municipality or your county, you may not be able to afford to do it all at once. So this is a way that you can do it by breaking it into sections. And you can prioritize sections where you know you've had trouble in the past. Maybe you had an older historic section like I talked about, where you have older trees that may be starting a cycle of decline. You can prioritize that area, right? Or maybe your priority would be your park spaces where you're inviting people to be. So you want to do your parks first. But different ways they can be prioritized. And a complete tree inventory, of course, is going to provide the most information, but it's also the most expensive to conduct and maintain. Usually those are done on 5-year intervals, right? We spread them out over time because they are costly, but it gives you a good picture of how your trees are doing overall in that every 5-year window. And you can identify, which trees you need to work on over the next 5 years, right? Or what areas you need to work on. So tree inventory data, well, it's collecting extensive data is only worth the time and cost if it's utilized updated and maintained. What's the point of gathering all this specific information if you're not going to do anything with it, right? Most inventories include tree species, the diameter of the tree at breast height, location of the tree, the condition of the tree, what needed maintenance there may be, and notes, maybe something they observed about the tree. Maybe it's too close to something, or it's in the wrong place. It may need to come out sooner than later. You may also include site information like your crown dimension, your maintenance recommendations, and your risk assessment. Is this tree still in good condition? Is it now becoming a moderate risk? Is there a condition that could be not repaired? You know, like a hollow cavity is starting. That's not something we can fix. You know, in the old days, they used to fill it with cement. That didn't work then, and it doesn't work now. So you can't put back wood once it's gone. It's just the way it is. And you can train volunteers is a way that you can reduce the cost of that tree inventory. Teach them about the trees and what you need them to look for is a good way to reduce your cost. So there are regulatory and legal issues involved. Municipalities have a duty to keep residents and visitors safe. Like I talked about, you're inviting them to that park. You need to make sure that you have a safe space for them to be, right? So they have a duty of care. That's the key. Municipalities, homeowners, they all have a duty of care. And they may have a liability in the event of a tree failure that causes damage or harm if they did not perform that duty of care, all right? So if your municipalities hired you as their arborist, you're going to look for the areas where they have those visitors coming. And you want to make sure you're doing that duty of care and your due diligence in performing those inspections and having the risks managed, right? So risk management is an important component of an urban forestry program. It's not enough just to identify the risks. You then have to manage them. You have to decide if this tree can be pruned and reduce the risk, or if the tree is in such bad shape, you just have to remove the risk to get rid of it. But there are ways to reduce risk without removing the tree totally, depending on the situation and the type tree. A risk management plan should include policies for identifying the tree, assessing the tree, reporting it, and then mitigating the risk from the potential hazard trees, right? So that's what a risk management needs to include, is identifying, assessing, reporting, and mitigation for the risk from potentially hazardous trees. A risk management plan may also include a standard of care statement. It might include the determination of acceptable risk. Who determines that? You know, what risk is exactly acceptable? Is it the homeowners? Probably would be the last one to have a say in what's their acceptable level of risk. On a city property, maybe it's the city manager, maybe it's the mayor, but somebody needs to be the one who determines that acceptable risk, right? The frequency and methods that they're going to use for tree risk assessment, record keeping protocols. How and where are you going to store these records? Are they going to be available to public view? Are they going to be kept in a vault? I mean, what are you going to do with them, right? Hopefully you're keeping them and letting people know. Statement of how the risk management program is to be funded. Who's going to pay for all this? Is it going to come from a grant? Is it going to be money set aside from the general fund? I mean, how's this going to work? And, you know, there at the bottom is just a risk management setup. You know, is it negligible damage? But it's certainly going to happen. That would put it in a high category. If it had catastrophic risk results, and it was certainly going to happen, that puts it in the extreme category, and it goes on down from extreme to high to moderate to low. And your events are certain to happen, likely to happen, possible to happen. It's kind of unlikely, or it's very rare that this would happen. That's just kind of a chart to help you figure out your risk. So tree ordinances. We're going to talk about tree ordinances. They're legal regulations adopted to protect trees within a given jurisdiction. Now, you might be wondering why I have the Quaker Oat Man up there on the right-hand corner. For those of you that don't know, that's William Penn. William Penn invented the first tree protection or tree ordinance in America back in about the 70s or 80s. He came up with an ordinance for his city, his township, village, to protect, and it talked about the way to plant trees, the proper way to plant trees. And that was kind of how we got the ball rolling in America for trees, was good old William Penn, who just happens to look like the Quaker Oat guy. All right, so tree ordinances define the jurisdiction's authority. They describe the conditions and requirements of the ordinance. It establishes penalties for noncompliance. You know, $1,000 a tree, $1,000 a day, the tree remains unprotected. That's some jurisdictions, some are more than that. It also specifies the responsibility for the enforcement. Who's going to do this enforcement? Is it going to be your local police? Is it going to be your tree warden? Is it going to be your city arborist? Maybe it's your code enforcement officer. It just depends on how they set that up, but that's all spec'd out in your tree ordinance, right? The urban forester or municipal arborist should ensure that tree preservation and maintenance requirements are consistent with professional standards and best management practices. So the only thing that bothers me about that statement is preservation. You know, you preserve pickles, you don't preserve trees. It's not like we can put them in a giant jar. You conserve trees, right? Anyway, I digress. But basically, just remember that the urban forester or municipal arborist is the one that ensures trees maintenance and preservation requirements are consistent with professional standards and the best management practices that go along with that. Okay. If the computer will load, we'll go on. Come on, I know you can do it. Must be having a slow connection day. All right, there we go. Tree ordinances. So zoning and subdivision ordinances and comprehensive plans also impact your urban forest resources, right? Common components of that, the property owners must care for trees in the right-of-way zones adjacent to their property. That's written into a lot of ordinances. Guidelines and requirements for obtaining permits for tree planting, tree maintenance, or tree removal are common. Authorization for public workers to enter private property for tree inspections may be authorized in your code, or to perform required maintenance, right? That's rare on private property, but in some municipalities that happens. Lists of acceptable species to be planted, that happens a lot. A lot of times, you know, the invasives are banned. You know, there may be one that's more prone to a pest in your area that they don't want planted. So, you know, it's going to list that in your tree ordinance. And then regulations prohibiting the topping of trees is in almost every ordinance now because topping kills trees in the long run. So it's a bad practice. We don't want it in there. Permits. Everybody's going on the permit. You got to have a permit to remove trees nowadays. They may be required for planting. Some jurisdictions require that. Pruning, tree maintenance, or any activity that might affect trees, such as construction. You're definitely going to have a plan for that. And a permit. Municipal arborists should have the authority to review and approve all tree-related permits. And that's anything that's going to ground disturb within a tree, not just cut the tree or bash into the trunk. It's the root system. You know, our code, we wrote in, if you disturb the root system of that tree, you're going to be required a permit if you're proposing that, right? Because you can't do in a lot of areas, you can't disturb that critical root zone. It may require a certain work procedures and clearances before they can begin, like an inspection on your best management practices to make sure your tree protections are in the right place and your silt fences are in the right place and your construction entrance and exit, which should be the same. May require that all applicable standards and best management practices are followed. Require monitoring by an ISA qualified arborist or a tree service may be included in your permit. And then tree service licensing. A lot of jurisdictions are now making tree services get licenses and attending classes on proper tree care and tree removal and safety, just to make sure it's done correctly in their jurisdiction and that they know they have to have a permit. Tree preservation orders, TPOs, are legal regulations established by a local authority to protect a tree or multiple trees. They are very common in the UK. They are being adopted in America now and other parts of the country, Australia, things like that, to preserve trees during land development. So you actually have a standing tree preservation order, right? It's your legal regulation established by that local authority to protect trees or multiple trees. It may protect trees already in developed areas from removal. So you can't remove that tree once it's planted there. Or unapproved pruning or maintenance. If you incorrectly prune a tree, now this tree preservation order is going to kick in and you're going to get fined. And it may be for a fixed period of time or it may be permanent. It just depends on how the tree preservation order is written. Sorry about that. I don't know why my computer is being so slow today. Come on. All right, I'm going to try exiting and coming back in again. My apologies to everyone. I'm not sure what it's doing. Let's see. Okay, come on.
As long as you are not freezing, we're good.
Yeah, I'm not freezing, but the
Oh,
problem
you're
is I
good.
can't read anything. There we go.
There we go.
Okay, sorry about that, folks. It's kind of overcast and cloudy here. Maybe that's doing it. I'm not sure, but let's go on with standards. Standards are a widely recognized authority of acceptable performance. So a standard is a widely recognized authority of acceptable performance. Okay. Legal authority and enforcement of standards may vary from one jurisdiction to another. Failure to comply may lead to direct fines or other penalties. Your work site may get shut down. You might lose all your construction guys if you're a stop work order. That's one of the things that can happen here, along with fines. May be recognized in a court of law, even if not required by legislative authority, right? So your city's court may say, hey, you're going to be fined, and we've got this in our code of ordinances, and now you're going to have to pay this fee, even though your legislative body for the state didn't approve this. The municipality takes precedence, right? Or county. Specifications. Specifications are detailed plans, requirements, and statements of particular procedures and or standards used to define and guide. So specifications are detailed plans or requirements or statements of procedures or standards used to define and guide. Detailed specifications should be established by the urban forester, and they should be for planting, pruning, fertilizing, pest control and monitoring, installation of support or protection systems in trees, lightning protection, for instance, construction near trees. That's a big one. Or removals. They should apply to contracted work and internal work. That's important because I've seen a lot of damage done by water and sewer crews, right? I got to fix this sewer line. I got to fix this water line. To heck with the tree, you know. So it has to apply evenly to everybody. You can't say, well, you get a pass because you are part of the DOT, and so you don't have to worry about trees. Not so. So much so in Georgia that they wrote that into the DOT's code, and the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System permits required by the states also list trees as a best management practice. You have to protect trees as part of your best management plan. So, like I said, goes for everybody, not just the guys out in the field building new houses and buildings. It also goes for the internal crews with cities and municipalities and states. So we have the standards. I'm sure we've talked about that before. I know Rob has, I think I have. The American National Standards Institute, or ANSI, the A300 standards are for tree care operations. You might want to make note of that. But they're a tool basically written for writing specifications. How am I going to write the specification? Well, we're all going to refer back to the standards, so we all have the same language, basically. Specifications should be explicit. The ISA publishes a set of best management practices, also called BMPs, for arboriculture and urban forestry. BMPs provide a how-to for tree care and management procedures. That way we're all working on the same kind of thing and everybody has the same language, right? In management, our primary goal for urban forestry is to manage tree resources and maximize those benefits while managing any associated risks and costs, right? Urban forestry management plan documents the strategies and procedures for managing those trees within a predefined area or jurisdiction. Might want to highlight that, right? That urban forestry management plan, just highlight that section right there. The urban forestry management plan basically defines your goals and your objectives and your priorities for your community, right? And they're community individuals. So it may be one thing for this community, for somewhere else, it may be something else, right? Their priorities may be different. So for that community, it's going to define the goals, objectives, and priorities. You're going to define your available resources, any of them that you may have at your disposal. Establish your guidelines. Include key stakeholders. Who might those stakeholders be? Well, in a municipality, it might be your council. It's going to be your citizenry. It's going to be your business owners. Those all may be key stakeholders, right? Determine the resources needed to maintain a sustainable urban forest. Remember, we want this to go for as long as possible. We want it to be sustainable. Utilizes the tree inventory. It incorporates into the management plan. So you can say, you know, when we did our canopy study back in 2009, our canopy was 48%. We've looked at it again in 2017. Our canopy is now 48%. We've increased, right? Or you may say that it's decreased. Now we know we've got to plant more and protect the ones we have. But you're going to utilize that tree inventory and incorporate it into your management plan. And it should include periodic evaluations of progress and outcomes, and then suggestions for adjustments. So it's not a one-time be-all, we're done. You're going to keep adding to it. As you're achieving goals, you may now set a new goal, right? Or if something didn't work that was in your plan, maybe you want to change how that was set up so that it works better. The management plan may have a sub-plan, right? You may have a planting plan in your urban forestry management plan. You may have a conservation plan, how you're going to conserve the trees you have now. You may have maintenance plans for when the trees are going to be looked at and worked on. You might have a tree removal and replacement plan. Maybe there's an area that you know you're going to have trees that are being affected by a pest or whatever that are going to have to come out. You may want to set that up in as a sub-plan. A risk management plan, that's kind of crucial. You need to know where your risks are and how you're going to reduce those risks. So that's your risk management plan, right? Your operations plan, how's this all going to work, right? Who's going to do what? Your storm response and emergency plan. If you don't have one and you work or live in a city that, you know, doesn't have one, talk to your arborist or your council. It's really important to have that in place before these storms hit. Who's going to do what? Where are we going to, you know, how are we going to get the trees out of the street? How are we going to open up these corridors to the hospital? That kind of stuff. Public relations and your education plan. How are you going to educate people about your ordinance, about your trees, about your planting projects? How are you going to find volunteers? That all can be set up as a sub-plan under your forestry management plan. This is a big one, tree diversity, right? You should be looking at that in your planting plans, in your existing forest plans. How do you get some diversity in there? Plant the right tree in the right place. Remember, look up, don't create tree monsters that eat power lines. Match your trees to the planting sites. It's essential for tree health and the maximizing of tree benefits and eliminating future tree and utility and other infrastructure conflicts to put the trees in the right place to start with. Right tree, right place. For large tree populations, species diversity is important because in managing or maintaining that urban forest health and reducing catastrophic losses. Remember the American elm. So a Midwest city that won't be named planted Elm Street trees, and then they all died due to Dutch elm disease. So the next go around, they planted all ash trees. They didn't learn from the first time, and then the emerald ash borer hit. So you can see the before and after pictures there. You got beautiful street trees. They're all the same, unfortunately. And then you had nothing, right? Diversity is important. If you get a pest that hits a particular tree like that emerald ash borer, it's only going to affect your ash trees. So don't plant all of one species. Mix it up, you know, one tree, then two trees of something else, then another tree of something else, then two trees of something else. Mix it up so you're not losing all of your canopy at one time to a pest or a disease that only affects a certain type of tree. Hard lesson learned. All right, tree species selection. You want to pick one that's tolerant to the urban site conditions. It's hardy in the climate that you're in. It has attributes that make it a good street tree. I don't think that a black walnut would be a great street tree. I mean, can you imagine 60 feet tall, dropping one of those green hard things right on it? Oh, it would be a nightmare, right? People going unconscious, walking on the sidewalk. Yeah, no. Look at your tree's attributes and also its problems before you decide to make it a street tree, right? You want to pick a street tree that has few pest problems, because otherwise you're just going to be constantly treating it and hoping it survives, right? You don't want unwanted characteristics. Like I said, that giant ball dropping on your head, or, you know, something that's putting out thorns where you're going to be walking past it. Not a good idea. Native species diversity varies by geography, soils, and climate. Colder, there are less species. Warmer, you have more species. So, if you're up north, you're limited in what you can put in street trees. Down here in the south, we might have a lot of street trees we can pick from. But again, you're going to look at your soil, your geography, your climate, and what your native trees are like. Again, tree diversity, species diversity, and population is not to exceed 30% of trees from a single plant family. Okay. Diversity is not to exceed 30% of trees from a single plant family, 20% from a single genus, and 10% from a single species is a good rule to follow. That's how you get a good tree diversity. Okay. Might want to look at that formula, write it down, take a picture of it, highlight it in your book, highlight it in the slides. However, just keep that formula in mind. All right. Age and size diversity, again, are also important for sustainability and forest health and benefits. Tree maintenance. The goal is to sustain tree benefits and minimize those risks, right? We want to keep that tree healthy and doing what it needs to for as long as possible. Then we have to do some maintenance on it, right? A community should be proactive in pruning and vigilant in monitoring for potential hazards and tree health problems. So you've got to have enough staff, or you have to train enough staff to be able to keep an eyeball on these trees and make sure they're staying healthy, right? Maintenance activity is a combination of responses to calls and scheduled work. So we get calls all the time. Oh, the street tree, a limb broke in the last storm. Can you come prune it? If you can prune it correctly before it rips down the trunk, then you're minimizing the damage to the tree, right? Plus we have programs set up before our school systems start to elevate those tree limbs out of the walkways so that we have safe walk paths. But you routinely want to prune every 4 to 5 years, and other routine maintenance is recommended to manage costs long-term and reduce the time and expenses involved with emergency cleanups and removals. If you've done this pruning ahead of time, hopefully you've got good, well-attached branches and the tree's in good enough health to where it's going to withstand some of these straight line winds and things that come through with these storms. All right, work may be contracted out to private businesses in smaller communities, right? You may not have a tree staff that has all the equipment you need. I know we don't. So we're only a 4 square mile city, so we end up contracting it out to larger tree services to do the work for us when it's not something that our small staff can utilize. We don't have cranes and things like that, so we have to hire that work out. Work may be done in-house in larger communities. Our counties, they have the big trucks and cranes and they can do that kind of stuff. They have on-site forestry guys, but other ones have to hire out. Could be a combination of both, right? With bigger or more specialized tasks contracted. But planting and routine maintenance like mulching and small tree pruning, that can be done in-house. That's something that your landscape crews can do. So it just depends on your budget, again, and how much work you have and, the trees that you have on site that need work. All right, tree maintenance and risk management. Proactively pruning reduces failures and the potential for damage and injury and reduces emergency calls, like I said. So you're maintaining those risks. Tree roots may invade sewer pipes or damage sidewalks or other paved surfaces, causing damage or injuries, right? Those issues have to be minimized, mitigated, or resolved. And they have to be supported by plans and budgets. You can't just send somebody out there to fix something if you haven't budgeted for somebody to do that, right? Here's a good one. This tree in this sidewalk, I don't know how they expected it to live in this little circle. But obviously it's failing, right? It's leaning on the building. So it looks like, it's in the right of way. That's something that's going to have to be taken care of. You have to budget for that. You have to have staff for that. Or you have to hire outside to do that work. Okay, recycling wood waste. I want to make sure, I didn't miss it. Okay. Tree pruning and removal generates large volumes of wood waste, including logs, brush, leaves. Every time there's a giant storm that comes through, you're going to have a ton of wood waste generated. Logs can be cut into firewood. or given away. Urban wood waste can be used as biofuel. There's a lot of power companies now that are taking mulch and they use that to burn for biofuel, right? For the power companies. And then logs can be sold to lumber or paper mills if you have them working in your area. If you can't sell them, at least you can take them there. That's better than them going to the landfill, right? Even if they're not buying them, if they can utilize them, you're keeping them out of the landfill. They could be marketed as specialty wood for use by artisans. I know there's a big demand for hickory trees here and pecan. They are looking for those types of trees to make into different things. Logs and brush can be turned into mulch in a tub grinder. A lot of times larger counties will have those on site and they're actually making their own mulch and giving it to their citizens or selling it to companies who need it for erosion control and protecting their trees and that kind of thing. Wood chips from brush chippers can be recycled or composted with other organic waste. It's just a way to keep that stuff out of the landfills. Composting is a great idea. Composting is the process of decomposition of organic matter by microorganisms. The process generates heat and kills most of the pathogens and weed seeds that might be present. It piles or rows, they have to be turned, sometimes watered, and occasionally to supply oxygen and water necessary to hasten that decomposition process. And it reduces the chance of fires. If you just leave a mulch pile sitting, it will eventually catch fire because it produces that much heat. The final product that comes out is a rich organic material that's really good for gardening and landscaping. So composting is really big in the Georgia metro area. Most of the counties are doing it now. Part of the green building movement is wood waste recycling, and it's recognized and supported by the green building movement. The Green Building Council's Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design, or LEED, is a program that encourages energy efficiency, conservation of resources, improved air and water quality. Sustainable Sites Initiative, or SITES, is the landscape component of that LEED system. So they're looking to see what you're doing on your being sustainable on the site. Under the Sustainable Sites Initiative, it's an interdisciplinary effort of the American Society of Landscape Architects, the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center, and if you haven't been there, it's a gorgeous place. The United States Botanic Garden, it creates a voluntary national guideline and performance benchmarks for sustainable land design, construction, and maintenance practices. So it's all set up under that Sites Initiative, right? Sustainable Sites Initiative, that's what it is. And that's the link to it if you want to go check it out. And you get credits for being able to comply with the Sustainable Sites Initiative under that LEED program. So really helping to set up sustainable sites. Well, and trees do all kinds of things for wildlife in the urban forest. Wildlife is broadly including all animals and vegetation living in a natural, undomesticated, here's the key word, natural, undomesticated state, often used specifically in reference to animals, right? That's wildlife. It's an important part of the urban ecology. The ecosystem is a complex system of living organisms and their abiotic environment. And it's affected by all activity within and around that urban forest. You might just want to take a look at those two definitions. They might pop up somewhere, but it is an important part of the urban ecology. So all kinds of animals out there. Bobcats is one of them here in the South. We have a lot of those. You may never see them, but you'll see evidence of them. The urban forest provides habitat and food for a wide range of wildlife. Maybe wildlife legislation or regulations in effect that impact tree maintenance activities. So in some of these protected areas, you can't remove trees. They're home for owls or eagles or hawks, and you can't take trees away from those areas, thank goodness. So you've got to recognize during pest eradication that one species may have a significant effect on another species. And a holistic approach may be required. If you have a rat overpopulation, you may want to think about poisoning things because the hawks and the owls and the eagles eat that stuff and then they die. So one thing is affecting other things. I'm not saying I want the rat population to run rampant, but if we have enough trees to support our predators, then maybe those populations are kept in check a little better too. And there are also different types of traps that will not affect the predators like those poisons will. So just something to keep in mind. It's all connected, you know. All right, so information and education is a huge part of the urban forest practice, right? You're going to have public relations, communication, partnerships, awareness are key elements of a successful urban forestry program. You've got to be able to make those connections and communicate with people. Urban foresters have to communicate with government decision makers, administrators, and staff. There are citizen-led tree commissions and tree boards that you may have to interact with. The public in general, you're going to talk and educate people out in the public. You've got to articulate your vision and your goal and your need for your urban forestry program, right? If you can't tell them why should they do it? You know, you have to be able to bring that vision to life, to share that goal or that need for your urban forest. You must increase awareness of a program's benefits and goals. What is this going to do for our community? You know, we recently put in a penalty. If you remove a tree that was in good condition, you are going to pay a benefits loss for the community. And we had to raise awareness of what those benefits for a good tree was. You know, how many gallons of water that takes up, like we talked about, the water treatment, the air that it puts out, the cleaning the air, you know, storing the carbon, reducing the heat load. That's a big part of it too. You know, you've got to make them understand that, or we would have never gotten that passed. So you got to increase the awareness of the program's benefits and goals. And you have to articulate tree benefits in qualitative and quantitative terms. They want to see the numbers. Numbers speak volumes. So when you say, hey, we don't have to trap and treat 20,000 gallons of water if this tree remains, they sit up and take notice of that because that's money saved, right? So you have to be informative and educational on what you do and with all these different folks. And that is the end of our presentation. Are there any questions?